The screams tore through the sterile air of Dulles International Airport, shattering the morning calm instantly. Passengers froze in their tracks, their eyes wide with terror as a massive Belgian Malinois lunged forward. It was Titan, the unit's most disciplined canine, and he had snapped. His target was a woman standing near the check-in counter, heavily pregnant, her hands protectively clutching her swollen belly. Titan did not just bark, he roared a sound so deep and guttural it vibrated in the chests of everyone nearby. The leash strained to its breaking point, the leather creaking under the immense force of the 80-pound animal. Jack Sullivan, the handler, dug his boots into the polished floor, his muscles burning as he fought to hold his partner back. "Titan, no," Jack shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief, but the command went unheard. The dog's eyes were wild, dilated with an intensity Jack had never seen in 5 years of service. This was not aggression, this was desperation. Titan snapped his jaws inches from the woman's stomach, saliva flying as she stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet and crashing hard onto the linoleum. "Please get him away from me!" she shrieked, shielding her face. The crowd erupted into chaos. People scrambled over suitcases to get away, while others pulled out phones recording the nightmare unfolding. A police dog attacking a pregnant woman, it was the kind of footage that ended careers and started riots. Jack hauled back on the leash using his entire body weight. "Down, Titan, stand down." But the dog refused to yield. He lunged again and again, letting out a high-pitched, frantic yelp that sounded more like a scream than a bark. He wasn't trying to bite her throat or her limbs. His focus was entirely locked on her midsection. Jack looked down at his partner, expecting to see the red haze of rage, but what he saw stopped his heart cold. Titan was trembling. His ears were pinned back against his skull, and his tail was tucked low. He wasn't attacking out of anger. He was terrified. Jack Sullivan thought his dog had gone mad in that moment. He thought his career was over, and that he had failed to control a dangerous weapon. But 24 hours later, as he stood amidst the wreckage of what they uncovered, he would wish he had listened sooner, because Titan wasn't trying to hurt the woman. He was trying to warn them about the monster hiding in plain sight. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Washington Dulles International. The air inside Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of burnt coffee floor wax and the humid breath of thousands of travelers. It was 900 hours the peak of the morning rush. The overhead speakers chimed with the rhythmic announcements of boarding calls and security reminders, a drone of noise that usually faded into the background for Officer Jack Sullivan. He adjusted his tactical vest, feeling the familiar weight of the gear against his chest. He was 52 years old, and his knees ached when it rained, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Beside him walked Titan, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, with a coat the color of burnt toast and a black mask that gave him a perpetual look of seriousness. They moved through the crowd with a silent synchronicity developed over years of patrol. Titan did not pull on the lead. He walked shoulder to shoulder with Jack, his claws clicking softly against the terrazzo floor, a rhythmic metronome that grounded Jack in the chaos. They passed a family arguing over a misplaced passport and a group of businessmen hurrying toward the first-class lounge. Titan ignored them all. He ignored the smell of a half-eaten bagel dropped near a trash can. He ignored the high-pitched squeal of a toddler running past. He was working. To the civilians watching, he was a deterrent, a symbol of authority. To Jack, he was the only partner who had never let him down. Jack reached down absently, scratching the spot behind Titan's ears. "You tired old man," Jack murmured. Titan looked up, his amber eyes bright, and let out a soft huff before returning his gaze to the sea of legs ahead. They were finishing a double shift. Jack was running on stale coffee and adrenaline, but he preferred the work to the silence of his empty house. Since his wife died 3 years ago, the airport was the only place that made sense. Here there were rules, there were lines. There was a clear distinction between safe and unsafe, or so he thought. The atmosphere in the terminal was heavy that morning. The humidity from a summer storm outside had seeped in, making the air conditioning work overtime. Jack wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, scanning the entry doors. He was looking for the usual suspects: pickpockets, erratic behavior, unattended bags. He was not looking for her. But then, the automatic doors slid open and the rhythm of the airport seemed to stutter. Sarah Jenkins entered. She did not look like a threat. She looked like a woman who was exhausted. She wore a loose floral maternity dress that draped over a very large, low-hanging belly. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she gripped the handle of a small rolling suitcase with white-knuckled intensity. She was sweating profusely, her skin pale and clammy under the harsh fluorescent lights. Jack noticed her immediately, not because she looked dangerous, but because she looked like she might faint. He took a step forward, intending to ask if she needed a medic. That was when the leash went taut. It happened so fast, Jack nearly lost his balance. 1 second, Titan was in a relaxed heel. The next, he was a statue. His entire body went rigid, the muscles under his short fur rippling as they locked into place. He stopped breathing. His mouth closed, cutting off his panting, and his nose lifted to the air nostrils, flaring wide. He inhaled deeply once, twice, tasting something in the air that no human could detect. Jack felt the vibration travel up the leather lead into his hand. It was a low-frequency tremor starting in Titan's chest and building into a growl that sounded like grinding stones. Titan Jack warned, his voice low, "Leave it." But Titan did not leave it. His head snapped toward the woman in the floral dress. Sarah had stopped walking. She had seen the dog. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, Jack saw something flash across her face that didn't fit the profile of a tired, pregnant traveler. It wasn't just fear of a large animal. It was recognition. It was terror. She took a step back, clutching her belly tighter. That movement was the trigger. Titan exploded. He did not bark the alert for narcotics, which was a passive sit. He did not bark the alert for explosives, which was a passive down. He launched himself forward with a ferocity that defied all his training. He hit the end of the leash with such force that Jack was dragged 2 steps forward, his boots skidding on the floor. Titan let out a roar, a sound of pure primal dominance that silenced the nearby conversations instantly. The woman screamed, throwing her hands up. Titan lunged again, snapping his teeth at the air between them. He was cutting off her path. He moved left then right, mirroring her movements, refusing to let her pass. He was hurting her, cornering her against a concrete pillar. Jack wrapped the leash around his wrist, using both hands to haul the dog back. Titan heel now. The command was shouted, but Titan was beyond commands. He was operating on instinct, ancient and undeniable. He sensed something that overrode his loyalty to Jack. He sensed a predator. The scene escalated with terrifying speed. The terminal transformed from a transit hub into a theater of conflict. Passengers who had been mindlessly scrolling on their phones now surged backward, creating a wide circle around the spectacle. The silence of shock broke into a cacophony of shouts. "Get that dog away from her!" A man in a business suit yelled, stepping forward but stopping short when Titan whipped his head around and snarled. A woman near the kiosk pulled out her phone, holding it high like a weapon, streaming the event live to the world. "Look at this police brutality," she narrated, her voice shrill. "They are attacking a pregnant lady." Jack felt the sweat prickle on the back of his neck. He knew how this looked. A 50-year-old cop with a weaponized dog terrorizing a vulnerable woman. But he also knew Titan. He felt the dog's energy through the leash, and it wasn't the blind rage of an aggressive animal. It was panic. Titan was trying to push the woman back, trying to create distance between her and the rest of the crowd. He was barking at her stomach. His muzzle wrinkled back to expose gums and teeth, but he wasn't biting her flesh. He was snapping at the air around her belly, as if the threat was emanating from the child inside her. Security officers from the Transportation Security Administration came running, their radios blaring. A supervisor, a man Jack had clashed with before, named Miller, pushed through the crowd. "Sullivan, control your animal!" Miller shouted, his hand hovering over the taser on his belt. Jack placed his body between Miller and Titan. "Don't touch him!" Jack roared back, his voice ragged. "He is alerting Miller. He is alerting on something." Miller looked at the sobbing woman who had now slid down the pillar to the floor, clutching her stomach and gasping for air. "She is pregnant, Sullivan. Look at her. Your dog is confused. Pull him back, or I will put him down." Jack looked down at Titan. The dog was foaming at the mouth now, his eyes rolling back slightly, the whites visible. He was hyperventilating. He looked up at Jack for a split second, and in that gaze, Jack saw a plea. "Trust me." The dog lunged again, straining so hard he was choking himself against the collar. He wasn't confused. He was certain. Jack made a choice in that fraction of a second, a choice that would define the rest of his life. He didn't pull Titan back. He shortened the leash and held his ground, facing the angry crowd and the approaching security team. "Back off!" Jack shouted to the civilians. Give us room. Everyone clear the area now. The crowd booed. Someone threw a plastic water bottle. It hit Jack in the shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He looked at Sarah Jenkins. She was curled in a fetal position on the floor, sobbing hysterically. Please, she cried, her voice thin and high. My baby. You're hurting my baby. The crowd surged forward, fueled by righteous anger. Miller unclipped his taser, the red laser dot dancing across Titan's flank. I am ordering you, Sullivan, stand down. And then the dynamic shifted. Sarah Jenkins gasped, a sound of genuine agony that cut through the noise of the mob. Her body went rigid, her back arching off the cold floor. She clutched her stomach so hard her knuckles turned white. A dark, wet stain began to spread across the front of her floral dress. It wasn't water. It was thick and viscous. From the distance, it looked red like blood. A collective gasp of horror sucked the air out of the terminal. She's bleeding, a woman screamed. She's losing the baby. Two paramedics who had been waiting on the perimeter rushed forward, their medical bags swinging. They moved to kneel beside Sarah, reaching out to touch her stomach to assess the trauma. No, Jack shouted. But it wasn't Jack who stopped them. It was Titan. The dog broke his stance. He did not attack the paramedics, but he threw himself into the space between them and the woman. He stood over her, snarling with a ferocity that froze the medics in their tracks. He snapped at their hands, forcing them to recoil. Get the dog off her, Miller screamed, moving in with the taser raised. Jack grabbed Miller's arm, shoving him back. Wait. Just wait. Jack fell to his knees beside his dog. He was close enough now. Close enough to smell it. The air around the woman didn't smell like iron or copper like blood should. It didn't smell like birth. It smelled sharp, acrid. It stung the inside of his nose like nail polish remover mixed with something sweet and rotting. It was a chemical smell. Jack looked at the stain on the dress. It was too bright, too thin. He looked at Titan. The dog wasn't looking at the woman's face. He was staring intently at the liquid pooling on the floor, his nose twitching violently, his growl dropping to a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was a containment breach. Jack looked up at Miller, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization. That's not blood, Jack whispered, his voice trembling. Miller stopped the taser, lowering slightly. What? Jack stood up slowly, dragging Titan back just an inch, but keeping the barrier intact. He looked at the crowd, then at the paramedics. Do not touch her! Jack bellowed, his command voice echoing off the high ceilings. Don't let that liquid touch your skin. This is a biohazard. Clear the terminal. Code red. I repeat, code red. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the smell hit the others. The sharp chemical tang drifted up from the floor, causing people to cough and cover their mouths. Panic replaced anger. The crowd turned and ran, a stampede of fear-clattering luggage and screaming children. In the center of the swirling chaos, Jack stood alone with Titan and the woman writhing on the floor. He looked at the fake blood pooling around her, knowing that whatever was inside that belly, it wasn't human, and it was leaking. The transition from the deafening chaos of the main terminal to the sterile, suffocating silence of the containment zone felt like stepping out of a war zone and into a tomb. The air inside the baggage claim area had been scrubbed clean by heavy industrial fans, but the metallic tang of ozone and fear still lingered, clinging to the back of Jack's throat like a bad memory. They had erected the makeshift isolation unit in record time, a sprawling monstrosity of thick, translucent plastic sheeting and yellow hazard tape that looked alien against the mundane backdrop of luggage carousels and advertisement posters. It was a bubble of negative pressure, a hastily constructed prison designed to keep death from leaking out into the rest of the world. The hum of the air filtration units was constant, a low, droning vibration that seemed to drill directly into the base of the skull, replacing the usual sounds of travel with a mechanical heartbeat of containment. Jack sat on the cold terrazzo floor, his back pressed against a concrete pillar just outside the perimeter of the tent. His legs were stretched out in front of him, the muscles in his thighs trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash that was beginning to set in. He felt heavy, anchored to the ground by the weight of his tactical vest and the heavier burden of uncertainty. Beside him, Titan sat like a stone gargoyle, immovable and silent. The Belgian Malinois was not resting. His ears were rotated forward, twitching at the faintest rustle of the plastic walls. His amber eyes were unblinking, locked onto the blurry silhouette of Sarah Jenkins inside the tent. Through the distorted layers of polyethylene, she looked small and fragile, a broken figure curled on a gurney surrounded by machines that beeped in rhythmic indifference. Most dogs would have checked out by now. After the threat was contained, after the excitement of the takedown, a canine would usually look to its handler for a reward for the ball or the tug toy that signaled the game was vert. But Titan was not looking for a reward. He was still working. His body was tense, the fur along his spine settling slowly but not completely flat. He let out a low whine, a sound so high-pitched and thin it was almost inaudible over the drone of the filters. It wasn't a whine of impatience. It was a sound of distress. Jack reached out his hand rough and scarred, finding the thick fur at the scruff of Titan's neck. He buried his fingers there, feeling the heat radiating from the dog's skin, the steady thrum of a pulse that was beating just a little too fast. "You knew, didn't you, buddy?" Jack whispered, his voice raspy in the quiet. "You knew before any of us." Titan didn't turn his head. He didn't acknowledge the praise. His entire universe had narrowed down to that plastic tent and the woman inside it. Jack watched his partner studying the way the dog's nostrils flared, taking in the scent of the air, venting from the isolation unit. Titan wasn't growling at the woman anymore. The aggression that had terrified the terminal had evaporated, leaving behind a fierce protective intensity that was even more unsettling. It was the look a dog gave when guarding a wounded pack member, not a dangerous intruder, and that realization sent a cold shiver down Jack's spine. If Titan wasn't trying to hurt her, then he was trying to save her, and if he was trying to save her, then the threat wasn't Sarah herself. It was something else, something inside her. Inside the tent, the air was thick and stagnant. Even from the outside, Jack could feel the claustrophobia of it. The hazmat team had stripped Sarah of the floral dress, leaving her in a thin hospital gown that did nothing to hide the unnatural distension of her abdomen. She wasn't moving much, just lying there with her eyes staring blankly at the plastic ceiling, tears leaking silently down her temples. Every few seconds, her hand would flutter toward her stomach, a reflex she couldn't control before she would flinch and pull it back as if the very thing she was carrying terrified her. Jack could see the fear radiating off her in waves, and he knew Titan could smell it. The sour, sharp scent of terror was probably overwhelming for a nose that could detect a single drop of gasoline in a swimming pool. Jack leaned his head back against the pillar, closing his eyes for a second. The image of the red liquid pooling on the floor played on a loop in his mind. It hadn't been blood. The hazmat scan had confirmed it within minutes of the area being cleared. It was a chemical precursor, a stabilizing agent used in high-grade explosives mixed with something else, something biological. The mixture was volatile, dangerously unstable, and it was leaking. Jack rubbed his face with his free hand, feeling the grit of the day on his skin. He thought about his wife, about the long nights he had spent in hospital, waiting rooms, praying for news that never got better. He knew the weight of waiting. He knew the suffocating feeling of helplessness when a life hung in the balance and there was nothing you could do but sit and watch. But this was different. This wasn't a sickness. This was a design. Someone had done this to her. Someone had turned a human being into a vessel for destruction. The cruelty of it made Jack's stomach churn. He looked back at Titan. The dog had shifted slightly, pressing his shoulder against Jack's knee, offering comfort even as he maintained his vigil. It was a small gesture, a reminder that they were in this together. In a world that had suddenly gone mad, where pregnant women were walking bombs and airports were battlefields, this connection was the only thing that made sense. The warmth of the dog, the solid weight of him, was an anchor keeping Jack from drifting into panic. Jack murmured, stroking the velvet softness of the dog's ears. "We are not leaving her. I promise." Titan let out a heavy sigh, his breath huffing against the floor, but his gaze never wavered. He was waiting for something. Jack could feel it. The dog sensed a shift in the atmosphere that the humans hadn't caught up to yet. The air around the tent seemed to vibrate with a new tension. Movement flickered on the other side of the baggage claim. The heavy double doors swung open, and a team of people in scrubs and tactical gear marched in. They moved with the grim purpose of executioners. At the front was a woman Jack recognized, Dr. Emily Chen, the best trauma surgeon in the state, flanked by a man who looked more like a tank than a technician, Mike Russo, the head of the bomb squad. Titan stood up instantly, his claws clicking on the tile. He didn't bark, but his posture changed. He stood tall, chest out, placing himself deliberately between the approaching team and the glass wall of the isolation unit. He was drawing a line in the sand. Jack scrambled to his feet, his knees popping, protesting the sudden movement. He placed a hand on Titan's harness, feeling the tension coil in the dog's muscles. "These are the good guys," Titan Jack said softly, though he wasn't entirely sure if Titan believed him. The dog watched the doctors approach, his eyes narrowing. He didn't trust them. He didn't trust anyone right now except Jack. And as the medical team began to suit up, pulling on heavy protective layers and checking their instruments, Jack realized that the nightmare inside that tent was about to enter a new terrifying phase. The silence was over. The surgery was about to begin. The airlock of the isolation tent hissed open with a sound like a dying breath, breaking the seal between the sterile safety of the concourse and the volatile atmosphere inside. Emily Chen stepped through first, her movements stiff and encumbered by the layers of the hazmat suit. She was a woman of science, a trauma specialist who had spent 15 years in emergency rooms piecing together bodies broken by car wrecks and street violence, but nothing in her career had prepared her for this. The rubber of her boots squeaked against the plastic flooring, a sharp intrusive noise in the heavy silence. Behind her loomed Mike Russo, the man they called the Hammer. He was a mountain of a man encased in a bomb suit that looked like medieval armor reimagined for the apocalypse. His breathing was audible through the comm system, a rhythmic mechanical rasp that sounded more like a ventilator than a human being. They were entering the belly of the beast. The tent was claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of recycled oxygen and the sharp chemical tang that had cleared the terminal. In the center of the room, Sarah Jenkins lay strapped to a gurney. She was no longer the woman in the floral dress. She was a medical anomaly, a hostage, and potentially the epicenter of a blast radius that could level the entire wing of the airport. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically between the two figures approaching her. She tried to speak, but her voice was a dry croak, her lips cracked and bleeding from biting them in terror. "Please," she whispered, the word barely forming. "Please, don't hurt me." Russo didn't speak. He wasn't there to offer comfort. He was there to assess threat levels and blast trajectories. He moved to the foot of the gurney, his gloved hands hovering over the instrument panel of his suit, ready to jam the signal if he detected a trigger. It was Chen who moved to the side of the bed. She tried to offer a reassuring smile, but realized quickly that behind the thick visor of her helmet, it would be lost. Instead, she raised her gloved hands, slowly showing her palms in a universal gesture of peace. "We are here to help you." Sarah Chen said, her voice filtered through the suit's speaker, sounding tinny and distant. "But we need to see. We need to know what is happening inside you." Sarah sobbed, her body convulsing slightly against the restraints. The movement sent a ripple of alarm through the room. Russo took a sharp step forward, his hand raising in a stop motion. "Do not move," he barked, his voice deep and distorted. "If you move, you could trigger it." Sarah froze, tears streaming horizontally into her ears. "I can't help it," she gasped. "It hurts. It feels like it's burning." Chen looked at the woman's abdomen. The skin was distended tight as a drum stretched to the point of translucency. It was an angry mottled red-hot to the touch, even through the layers of Chen's gloves. This was not a pregnancy. This was a biological impossibility. Chen reached for the portable ultrasound machine on the cart beside the bed. Her hands were shaking. She took a breath, forcing herself to find the steady calm that had guided her through countless surgeries. She needed to be a doctor now, not a frightened civilian. She squeezed the bottle of conductive gel. The clear blue substance fell onto Sarah's stomach with a wet slap. Sarah flinched violently, a cry of pain escaping her throat as the cold gel hit her feverish skin. Steady Chen murmured more to herself than the patient. She picked up the transducer probe, the plastic wand feeling heavy and alien in her hand. Outside the plastic walls, she could see the blurry shape of Jack Sullivan and the dark silhouette of the dog Titan. They were watching, bearing witness. The dog had been right. She knew it in her gut. Now she just had to prove it to the world. She pressed the probe against Sarah's skin. The contact was firm. She slid it upward, starting from the pelvic bone and moving toward the navel. The monitor on the cart flickered to life. The screen washed in static gray and black, the digital snow of searching sound waves. Chen squinted through her visor, focusing on the image. Usually an ultrasound was a moment of joy, a time to count fingers and toes, to listen for the swooshing gallop of a tiny heart. She looked for the familiar curvature of a spine, the round shadow of a skull, the fluid sacs of a placenta. She looked for life, but the screen did not show life. The room fell into a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked into a vacuum. The only sound was the hum of the machine and the ragged, terrified breathing of the woman on the table. Chen moved the probe higher, pressing harder, trying to find an angle that made sense. She rotated her wrist, searching for biology, searching for nature. But the physics of sound waves did not lie. On the screen, amidst the gray noise of soft tissue, hard white lines began to emerge. They were not the organic curved lines of bone. Bone absorbed sound in a specific way, creating a soft shadow. These lines were sharp, jagged, they were geometric. A perfect rectangle appeared floating in the dark fluid of the abdomen. Then another, then a cluster of thin snake-like tendrils that coiled around the central mass, not like intestines, but like wires. Chen stopped breathing, her eyes widened, pupils dilating as her brain tried to reject what it was seeing. It looked like a circuit board submerged in oil. She moved the probe again, sliding it to the left where the baby's heart should be. She expected to see the flutter of a valve. Instead, she saw a dense, solid block that cast a deep black acoustic shadow. It was metal, solid, heavy machined metal. Russo leaned over her shoulder, his helmet clunking softly against hers. He was looking at the screen, his breath catching in the comms. "That's not a kid." He whispered the words, heavy with horror. Chen shook her head slowly, numbly. "No," she replied, her voice trembling. "It is not." She adjusted the depth of the scan, looking deeper into the cavity. The image sharpened. The liquid surrounding the objects wasn't amniotic fluid. It was too viscous, moving sluggishly on the screen, and suspended in that liquid were glass vials, delicate, thin-walled vials arranged in a honeycomb pattern, wired together with surgical precision. This was not a pregnancy. It was a construction project, a masterpiece of surgical cruelty. Someone had opened this woman up, hollowed her out, or rearranged her organs and filled the void with a machine designed to kill. The realization hit Chen with the force of a physical blow. She pulled the probe back slightly, her hand trembling so hard the image on the screen jumped. Sarah was watching them, watching the reflection of the horror on their faces. "What do you see?" she whimpered. "Is my baby okay?" Chen looked down at the woman. She saw the stitches now. They were hidden under the curve of the belly, expertly done, almost invisible, but they were there. A scar that ran hip to hip, healed over but angry. This hadn't happened yesterday. This had been done weeks ago. They had turned her into a walking vessel. Chen looked at Russo. The bomb squad captain was frozen, staring at the monitor. He was reading the shapes on the screen like a blueprint. He pointed a gloved finger at a small, dense cluster of wires near the top of the mass. That, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "That is a receiver. It is connected to the vitals." Chen followed his finger. She saw it. A small rhythmic pulsing on the screen. It wasn't a baby's heart. It was a sensor. It was monitoring Sarah's pulse. "If her heart stops," Russo said softly, finishing the thought that was screaming in Chen's mind, "it detonates. If she goes into distress, it detonates. If we try to cut it out without bypassing the signal, it detonates." Chen pulled the probe away from Sarah's stomach, her stomach churning. She felt like she was going to be sick inside her helmet. She wiped the remaining gel from Sarah's skin with a towel, her movements gentle but mechanical. She couldn't look Sarah in the eye. How could she tell this woman that she was dead already, that she was nothing more than a biological timer counting down to 0? Jack was watching from outside. He saw the doctors recoil. He saw Russo step back and put a hand to his helmet, likely radioing command. Titan was pacing now, his nose pressed against the glass, whining that high-pitched, desperate sound again. The dog knew. He had smelled the chemicals leaking through the pores. He had smelled the copper of the wires and the cold death of the explosives. Chen turned off the machine, the screen fading to black, taking the nightmare image with it, but leaving the truth burned into their retinas. She looked at Russo. "We can't move her," she said. "If we move her and her heart rate spikes." Russo nodded. "We are trapped," he said. "We are sitting on a powder keg and the fuse is burning." He turned to the woman on the table. "Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man named Hammer, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You need to stay calm. You need to breathe. We are going to figure this out, but right now you are the only thing keeping us all alive." Sarah stared at him, her eyes glassy. She didn't understand the technical details, but she understood the tone. She understood the fear in the room. She closed her eyes, and a single tear tracked through the sweat on her temple. Chen looked back at the glass wall. She locked eyes with Jack Sullivan. She shook her head slowly, a microscopic movement that screamed disaster. Jack's face hardened. He understood. The dog hadn't attacked a pregnant woman. The dog had found a weapon of mass destruction wrapped in human skin, and they were all standing in the blast zone. The silence in the tent stretched out brittle and ready to snap. The only sound was the beep of the heart monitor connected to Sarah. Beep, beep, beep. A countdown that had no numbers, only a rhythm that could end at any second. The airlock cycle ended with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like a final gasp, releasing the pressurized seal that separated the nightmare inside the tent from the rest of the terminal. The heavy plastic flaps parted, and Dr. Emily Chen emerged. She didn't walk out. She stumbled. Her movements were jerky and uncoordinated, as if the gravity in the hallway had suddenly doubled, crushing her under an invisible weight. She clawed at the latches of her helmet, her fingers slipping on the smooth plastic in her haste. She needed air. She needed to breathe something that didn't taste of recycled oxygen and impending death. When the helmet finally came loose, she let it drop. It hit the floor with a hollow clatter, rolling away toward the wall, but Chen didn't even look at it. She braced her hands against her knees, gasping for breath, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her face was not just pale, it was gray, drained of every drop of blood, a mask of absolute unfiltered horror. Jack Sullivan had seen that look before. He had seen it on the faces of soldiers returning from patrol who had witnessed things they would never speak of. He had seen it on victims of violent crimes who had stared into the abyss and realized the abyss was staring back. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the tile, but he stopped a few feet away. There was an energy radiating off the doctor that felt dangerous, like static electricity before a lightning strike. Titan sensed it too. The Belgian Malinois stood up from his vigil beside the glass. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply walked over to Chen and pressed his cold, wet nose against her trembling hand. It was a gesture of profound empathy, a silent acknowledgement that they now shared a burden too heavy for any one species to carry alone. Chen looked down at the dog. Her eyes were glassy wide with shock. She reached out and buried her fingers in Titan's fur, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing left in a world that had suddenly turned into smoke. Then she looked up at Jack. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. She had to swallow hard, forcing moisture into a throat that had gone completely dry. Jack waited. The silence stretched out tight and brittle. "Jack," she whispered, and her voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You need to evacuate the perimeter, not just the terminal, the whole wing. You need to push the line back another 500 yards. Jack frowned, confusion warring with the dread in his gut. "We have containment, Emily. The hazmat team said it was a chemical leak. If it's a pathogen, we can—" Chen cut him off with a violent shake of her head. "It is not a pathogen. It is not a virus." She straightened up, wiping a hand across her mouth. Her eyes locked onto Jack's, piercing him with the truth. "It is not a baby, Jack. There is no baby." The words hung in the air, rejecting immediate comprehension. Jack blinked. "But she is pregnant. We saw the belly. We saw the distension." Titan alerted on the belly. Chen took a step closer, lowering her voice to a terrified hiss, as if she were afraid the woman inside the tent could hear her through the plastic walls. "We did the ultrasound. We scanned the cavity. The uterus is gone, Jack. Someone removed it. They performed a total hysterectomy, but they didn't sew her back up empty. They filled the void." Jack felt the blood drain from his own face. Filled it with what? Chen took a shuddering breath. "They implanted a silicone bladder. It is surgically grafted to her abdominal wall, woven into the muscle tissue so it doesn't shift. It is filled with a liquid, high density, viscous, and suspended inside that liquid are glass vials and a detonator." Jack's mind reeled. A detonator. Inside her. "It gets worse," Chen said, her voice trembling. "The liquid inside the bladder showed up on the density scan. It has the same chemical signature as the residue Titan smelled on the floor. It is nitroglycerin, Jack. Liquid nitroglycerin." Jack took a step back, his hand instinctively going to his mouth. "Nitro. It was unstable, volatile. A hard bump could set it off, a change in temperature could set it off, and this woman, Sarah Jenkins, was walking around with a liter of it sloshing inside her body where a child was supposed to be. That explains the leak, Jack murmured. The stitches tore. It's seeping out. Chen nodded, tears finally spilling over her lashes. But that is not the failsafe. The detonator. It is wired into her system. We saw the leads on the ultrasound. They ran wires up through her diaphragm. They connected the trigger directly to her heart. Jack froze. To her heart. It is a pacemaker trigger, Chen said, the words falling like stones. It monitors her pulse. If her heart rate drops below a certain threshold, boom. If her heart stops, boom. And if we try to surgically remove it without bypassing the signal, it interprets the loss of contact as death, and it detonates. She is a living bomb, Jack. A walking, breathing biological weapon. The realization hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. He looked back at the isolation tent. The blurry figure of Sarah Jenkins lay there strapped to the gurney, terrified alone. She wasn't just a mule. She was the device. The cruelty of it was staggering. It wasn't just about smuggling explosives past security. It was about creating a weapon that no scanner would detect because it was wrapped in the warm, beating camouflage of a human life. No metal detector would flag the liquid. No pat-down would reveal anything but the curve of a pregnant belly. Only Titan. Only a dog with a nose designed by nature to detect the faintest molecules of danger could have known. Titan let out a low whine, leaning his weight against Chen's leg again. He knew. He had smelled the nitroglycerin sweating through her pores. He had smelled the copper of the wires and the ozone of the electronics buried deep inside her wet tissue. He hadn't been attacking a pregnant woman. He had been trying to stop a walking catastrophe. He had blocked her path not to hurt her, but to keep her from walking onto a plane. If she had boarded a flight, the pressure change alone might have triggered the device, or the stress, or a moment of turbulence. Titan had saved hundreds of lives by pinning her to the floor. Jack looked down at his partner. The dog looked back, his amber eyes clear and intelligent. There was no confusion in him, only a deep, weary patience. He had done his job. Now it was up to the humans to understand. We are standing on a grave, Chen whispered. If that thing goes off inside this enclosed space, the overpressure will kill everyone within 300 feet instantly. The fireball will take the rest of the terminal. We are talking about a blast radius that creates a vacuum strong enough to pull the lungs out of your chest. Jack looked at Russo, who was still inside the tent, standing like a statue near the foot of the bed. The hammer was staying. He knew the risks. He was the only thing standing between the detonator and the end of the world. Jack grabbed his radio, his hand shaking for the first time in his career. He keyed the mic. Command, this is Sullivan. Escalate to Code Black. Repeat Code Black. We have a confirmed VBIED, Vehicle-Borne Improvised Explosive Device. But the vehicle is a hostage. I need the entire airport grounded. I need the airspace cleared. And I need a priest. He lowered the radio. He looked at Chen. Can we save her? Chen wiped her face, her expression hardening into a grim mask of resolve. We have to try. If she dies, we all die. We have to keep her calm. We have to keep her heart rate steady. And we have to find the person holding the remote. Because a rig this complex always has a manual override. Someone is watching her, Jack. Someone is close. Titan growled. It was a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. He turned away from the doctors, turning his back on the tent. He looked out toward the empty concourse, toward the shadows where the security lights didn't quite reach. His nose twitched. He caught a scent. Not the chemical smell of the bomb. Something else. A scent he remembered from the woman's dress, but older. Stale smoke, expensive cologne, and underneath it all the sour metallic stink of pure malice. Jack saw the shift. He saw the way Titan's ears locked onto the darkness. The dog wasn't guarding anymore. He was hunting. The bomb was the threat, but the bomber was the target. And Titan had just picked up the trail. The nightmare in the tent was a medical problem, but out here in the terminal, it was about to become a war. Jack unclipped the safety on his holster. Find him, he whispered. The air inside the isolation tent was thick with the smell of sanitized fear, a sharp chemical tang that coated the back of the throat. Sarah Jenkins lay strapped to the gurney, her eyes wide and glassy, staring up at the plastic ceiling that separated her from the rest of the world. The sedative was wearing off, leaving behind a raw, terrifying clarity. She could feel the weight of the device inside her, a heavy, unnatural mass that pressed against her spine with every shallow breath. The monitor beside her beeped a steady, rhythmic countdown that measured not time, but the fragility of her own existence. Beep, beep, beep. Russo stood at the foot of the bed, his armored presence looming like a silent sentinel, while Dr. Chen monitored the vitals. Sarah tried to shift her weight, but the restraints held her fast. The movement caused a spike on the monitor, the rhythm faltering for a second before stabilizing. Russo's hand twitched, hovering over the jammer on his belt. "Don't move," he said, his voice distorted by the helmet, but the command was clear. "You have to stay still, Sarah." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, running hot and salty into her ears. She wasn't a terrorist. She wasn't a monster. She was just a mom. A mom who had made an impossible choice. Jack Sullivan's voice cut through the static of the comm system coming from the speaker mounted inside the tent. He was standing just on the other side of the plastic wall, a shadowy figure with the silhouette of the dog beside him. "Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "we know it's not a baby. We know what they did to you. But we need to know why. You have to talk to us. Who did this?" Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, a sob tearing from her throat. "I can't," she whispered the words barely audible. "He's watching. He said he'd know." "Who is watching?" Sarah Chen asked, leaning closer, her hazmat suit crinkling softly. "The man," Sarah gasped. "The man who took her." Jack stepped closer to the plastic barrier, his hand pressing against it. "Took who, Sarah? Who did he take?" "My baby," she screamed, the sound shattering the tension in the room. "Emily. He took Emily." The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. It changed everything. The narrative shifted instantly from an act of terror to an act of desperation. Sarah wasn't the enemy, she was the weapon. A victim turned into a delivery system. She began to speak the words, tumbling out in a frantic rush, as if releasing the secret was the only way to purge the poison from her system. "It was 3 days ago," she sobbed. "We were at the park, the one with the blue slide." Emily loves that slide. "A man came up to us. He was dressed nice. He had a kind face. He asked for directions to the highway. I turned around to point, and then I felt a pinch in my neck. Everything went black." She gasped for air, her chest heaving against the straps. The heart monitor sped up dangerously. Beep, beep, beep. Russo placed a heavy gloved hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Breathe, Sarah. Slow down." I woke up in a room, she continued, her voice trembling. It looked like a clinic, but it was dirty. There were metal tables. And Emily, I could hear her crying in the next room, screaming for Mommy. I tried to get to her, but I was tied down. Then he came in. The man. He told me I had a choice. She paused, her eyes staring at a horror only she could see. He said I could watch her die right there. He put a gun to the wall, aiming at where her voice was coming from. Or I could help him move a package. He said it was just smuggling. He said I just had to wear the belly. I didn't know they were going to cut me open. I didn't know until I saw the knife. Chen looked away, her stomach churning. The cruelty was unimaginable. To force a mother to undergo surgery to mutilate her own body to save her child. It was a violation so deep it defied comprehension. "They put it inside me," Sarah whispered. "They showed me the trigger. It's wired to my heart, isn't it? I felt them do it. I felt the wires. He showed me the screen. He has a camera on her, Jack. She's in a cage. My baby is in a cage. She's holding her teddy bear, and she's waiting for me." Jack felt a cold fury rising in his chest. He looked down at Titan. The dog was pressing his nose against the plastic, whining softly. He could smell the distress. He could smell the mother's agony. "He told me if I didn't get on the plane." Sarah's voice broke. "If I didn't land in London and deliver the package, the cage locks. It's not just a cage. It's airtight. He said he'd suffocate her. He said he'd let me watch her run out of air while I sat on the plane. So I had to do it. I had to. I thought if I just delivered it, if I just did what he said, he'd let her go. But now I'm here, and he knows." Jack leaned in. "How does he know Sarah? Where is he?" "He's watching," Sarah insisted, her eyes darting around the tent as if the walls had eyes. He gave me a phone, a burner. He tracks the GPS. He monitors the heart rate signal. He knows I haven't boarded. He knows I'm stopped. You have to let me go. Please, just let me walk to the plane. I'll die. I don't care. Just let me save her. Russo shook his head slowly. We can't do that, Sarah. The device is unstable. It's leaking. If you go up to altitude, the pressure change will rupture the bladder. It will detonate. You will die, the plane will go down, and your daughter, she will still be in that cage. Sarah went limp, her fight evaporating into hopelessness. Then she's dead. She wailed a sound of pure grief. He's going to kill her. He said he wanted to watch. Jack froze. He said he wanted to watch. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. He likes it. The fear. He's close, Jack. He's here. In the airport. He has the remote. He said if I tried to signal, click. If I tried to run, click. He's playing a game. Jack looked out into the terminal. The man wasn't in some distant hideout. He was here. He was walking among the passengers, drinking coffee, watching the news feeds, waiting for the explosion. He was enjoying the show. Do you have anything of hers? Jack asked urgently. Anything that smells like her or him? Sarah fumbled with her hand, reaching into the pocket of the hospital gown. Her fingers shaking, she pulled out a small crumpled object, a hair ribbon, pink with white daisies, stained with dirt and sweat. He gave this to me, she whispered. Before he let me go, he wiped it on his hands. He said it was a souvenir. Jack signaled Russo. The tech cycled the airlock, retrieving the ribbon. He handed it to Jack. It was small, innocent, but to Titan, it was a target. Jack knelt, holding it out. Titan inhaled deeply. He smelled the child. He smelled the mother, and underneath it the sharp metallic stink of the man who had touched it, the man who smelled like chemicals and malice. Titan growled. It was a low, dangerous sound. He knew that scent. He had a face to put to the monster now. Jack clipped the leash to the harness. We're going to find him, Sarah. We're going to get the codes. You stay alive for Emily. Jack stood up, his eyes scanning the empty concourse. Find him, he whispered, and Titan lowered his head and began to hunt. The pink ribbon lay in the center of Jack's palm, looking impossibly small and fragile against the rough, calloused skin of his hand. It was a cheap thing, a piece of satin sold in packs of 10 at a dollar store, the kind of thing that ended up lost under car seats or tangled in laundry baskets. But right now it was the heaviest object in the world. It was the only physical link to a 4-year-old girl named Emily, who was sitting in a cage somewhere in the darkness, waiting for a mother who was strapped to a bomb. The ribbon was stained. There was the dark smudge of dirt from the playground where she had been taken, and the salty stiffness of dried tears. But underneath that was something else, a residue left behind by the monster who had taken it as a trophy. Jack knelt on the cold terrazzo floor, ignoring the ache in his knees. The air around them was still vibrating with the tension of the evacuation, but the immediate vicinity of the isolation tent was dead quiet. It was the eye of the storm. He held the ribbon out to Titan. The Belgian Malinois didn't need to be told. He stepped forward, his movements fluid and serious, the playful bounce of a pet replaced by the lethal precision of a working asset. He lowered his head, his black mask hovering inches from Jack's hand. Titan inhaled. For a human, a breath is just oxygen, a mechanical function to keep the blood moving. For Titan, it was a download of information more complex than any computer algorithm. The world exploded into a 3-dimensional map of chemical signatures. The first layer was the most obvious, the scent of the child. It smelled like strawberry shampoo milk and the dusty comfort of a teddy bear. It was a scent of innocence, bright and soft. Titan whined low in his throat, a sound of recognition. He knew this scent. It was the scent of the pack, the scent of the vulnerable things that needed protecting. But then he went deeper. He pushed past the strawberry and the dust. He found the second layer, fear. It was sharp and acidic, tasting like battery acid on the tongue. It was the sweat of a terrified mother, Sarah, the scent that was currently leaking out of the isolation tent behind them. It was the smell of the woman they had pinned to the floor. And then buried underneath it all, clinging to the fibers of the satin, like a parasite, Titan found him. The third scent. It was distinct. It was complex. It didn't smell like the frantic sweat of the travelers rushing toward the exits or the industrial cleaner used on the floors. It smelled of control. It smelled of expensive clove cigarettes, a heavy spices smoke that clung to skin and fabric long after the fire was out. It smelled of gun oil, the specific mineral tang of a well-maintained weapon. It smelled of a mint breath strip dissolving on a tongue, trying to mask the rot underneath. And binding it all together was the faint metallic resonance of the chemical explosive, the same volatile poison that was currently sloshing inside Sarah Jenkins. This was the scent of the man who had touched the ribbon, the man who had touched the bomb, the man who was holding the trigger. Titan pulled his head back, his nostrils flaring as he processed the data. He looked at Jack, his amber eyes burning with a cold, intelligent fire. He categorized the scent, locking it into his memory, filing it away under the instinctual label of enemy. He let out a sharp huff, clearing his nose of the background noise of the airport preparing to hunt. Jack saw the shift. He saw the moment the dog locked on. He clipped the leather leash onto the tactical harness, the metal snap sounding like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to scream. He leaned in close, his voice a rough whisper that carried the weight of 2 lives. "Find him, Titan. Find him." The command released the spring. Titan turned sharply, his claws scrambling for traction on the polished floor before finding their grip. He didn't run. He didn't sprint. He moved with a fast, predatory trot, his nose sweeping the air, his head moving side to side like a radar dish. He was cutting through the invisible currents of the terminal, ignoring the visual chaos and focusing entirely on the olfactory trail. To Titan, the airport was a chaotic ocean of noise. The air conditioning vents were blowing rivers of scent across the concourse, creating turbulence in the trail. He smelled the stale grease from the food court, the old coffee burnt onto the bottom of glass pots, the thousands of different perfumes and deodorants of the passengers. He smelled the cortisol of the security guards, the anxiety of the late travelers, the dirty diapers in the trash cans. It was a blizzard of information, a whiteout of smells that would have blinded a lesser animal. But Titan was a master. He filtered it out. He ignored the food. He ignored the fear. He was looking for the clove cigarette. He was looking for the gun oil. He pulled Jack toward the main concourse, moving away from the baggage claim and toward the heart of the terminal. The evacuation was still in progress, but it was a silent alarm. The authorities hadn't announced the bomb to the general public, fearing a stampede that would trigger the device's heart rate monitor. Instead, they were quietly funneling people away, creating a vacuum. But there were still people moving, stragglers and staff and security. Titan wove through them, his body low to the ground. He hugged the wall where the air currents were more stable. He paused at a trash can, sniffing the rim, then moved on. The scent was there. It was a trail of breadcrumbs left in the air, a phantom ribbon of smoke winding through the building. The man had walked here. He had walked here recently. The scent was fresh, not yet degraded by time or the ventilation system. They passed the security checkpoint. The TSA agents, recognizing Jack and the dog, stepped aside, their faces pale. They knew something was happening, something big, but they didn't ask. They just watched the man and the dog move with a terrifying singularity of purpose. Titan didn't even glance at them. He was following the ghost. The trail led them past the duty-free shops where the smell of expensive perfume was almost overwhelming, a chemical fog that made Titan sneeze once and shake his head. But he found the thread again. The clove scent was stronger now. It was mixed with the smell of alcohol, a rich, aged whiskey. The man wasn't running. He wasn't hiding in a bathroom or fleeing toward the exit. He was comfortable. He was waiting. Jack felt the leash tighten. He could feel the energy vibrating through the leather, a low hum of anticipation. Titan was picking up speed. The scent was getting hotter. They moved past the gates where empty rows of seats sat like silent witnesses. The man had walked past here. He had lingered here, maybe watching the news on the overhead monitors, maybe watching the chaos he had caused. Titan stopped at a pillar, sniffing at waist height. He growled softly. The man had leaned here. He had touched the concrete. The scent of the gun oil was potent here, transferred from a hand to the stone. Jack unholstered his weapon, keeping it close to his thigh. They were getting close. He scanned the area, his eyes moving from face to face, but he knew his eyes were useless compared to the dog's nose. He trusted Titan more than he trusted the surveillance cameras. The dog turned left, heading toward a restricted access corridor that led to the upper level, the VIP lounges, the places where the wealthy and the privileged waited for their flights, separated from the masses by glass and money. Of course, Jack thought bitterly, he wouldn't be in the crowd. He would be above it. He would want a view. He would want to look down and see the fire. Titan dragged him up the stairs, ignoring the elevator. The air in the stairwell was stagnant, trapping the scent. It was heavy here, cloying. The clove smoke was fresh. The man had smoked here recently, maybe just minutes ago. Titan's breathing changed. It became shallow and rapid. He was sucking in the scent, tasting the proximity. The growl in his throat became constant, a low, rolling thunder that warned of imminent violence. They burst out of the stairwell onto the upper mezzanine. The area was quieter, carpeted with plush rugs that muffled their footsteps. The lighting was softer, designed to soothe, but to Titan, it smelled like a trap. The scent trail led straight down the hallway toward the double-frosted glass doors at the end. The sign above the door read simply, "The Meridian Club. Members only." Titan stopped. He didn't sit. He didn't bark. He froze, his entire body pointing toward those doors like a compass needle finding north. The fur on his shoulders stood up in a rigid ridge. His tail was stiff, quivering slightly. He looked back at Jack, his eyes wide and dark. The message was clear. He is here. Jack felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The man inside those doors was holding a device that could vaporize Sarah Jenkins in half the terminal. He was holding the life of a 4-year-old girl in his hands, and he was likely surrounded by innocent civilians who had no idea they were sitting next to a monster. Jack checked his radio, ensuring his earpiece was secure. He whispered the code that would bring the tactical team to his position, but he knew they were minutes away. He didn't have minutes. If the man saw the police, if he sensed the net closing, he might panic. He might press the button just to spite them. Jack had to go in, and he had to go in quiet. He looked at Titan. The dog was vibrating with the need to attack. The scent of the enemy was overwhelming now, filling his nose with the chemical signature of evil. Titan knew what he had to do. He didn't need a command to attack. He needed a command to wait. Easy. Jack breathed, his hand resting on the dog's head. Silent. Titan understood. He closed his mouth, cutting off the growl. He lowered his body, stalking forward on silent paws. They moved toward the glass doors, a man and a beast hunting a ghost in a skute. The smell of cloves and expensive whiskey grew stronger with every step, masking the metallic scent of the detonator, but Titan could still smell it. He could smell the battery. He could smell the switch, and he was ready to tear the hand that held it apart. The concourse was a river of panic flowing in the wrong direction. The silent evacuation order had bled into the general population, and what had started as a controlled exit was rapidly deteriorating into a stampede. Thousands of travelers were pushing toward the glass doors, their faces masks of confusion and rising terror. The low rumble of rolling suitcases on the tile sounded like distant thunder, a mechanical roar that threatened to drown out the voice of authority. Jack Sullivan felt like he was wading upstream in a flood. He was fighting against the current of humanity, his shoulder-checking bodies, his boots struggling for traction on the polished floor. But he wasn't moving under his own power. He was being towed. Titan was a force of nature. The Belgian Malinois had dropped his center of gravity, his claws digging into the grout lines of the terrazzo, his powerful hind legs driving him forward with the torque of a freight train. The leather leash was a taut line of communication vibrating with the dog's singular obsession. Titan didn't care about the shouting passengers. He didn't care about the crying children or the TSA agents trying to corral the mob. He had a vector. He had a scent, and he was going to follow it to the end of the earth. Jack gritted his teeth, his breath hissing through his clenched jaw. "Make a hole!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with the strain. "Police K9 coming through. Move! Move!" The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of primal fear. They saw the dog. They saw the black mask, the laid-back ears, the focus that bordered on madness. Titan wasn't barking. He was too busy breathing, too busy sucking in the air to waste oxygen on noise. His mouth was clamped shut, his nostrils flaring and collapsing in a rapid staccato rhythm. He was filtering the world. To Jack, the terminal smelled of sweat and fear and the metallic taste of adrenaline. To Titan, it was a chaotic symphony of chemical data. He smelled the sour tang of a businessman's anxiety 3 feet to the left. He smelled the sugary rot of a spilled soda near the trash can. He smelled the ozone of the X-ray machines and the rubber of the conveyor belts. It was a blizzard of information, a sensory overload that would have paralyzed a lesser animal. But Titan was not a lesser animal. He was a predator. He took all that noise and he pushed it aside. He locked onto the one thread that mattered: the clove cigarette, the gun oil, the man. The scent was a physical thing to him, a red line painted in the air. It wove through the legs of the travelers, it clung to the fabric of the carpet, it lingered in the stagnant air of the hallway. It was the scent of the enemy. Titan pulled harder. Jack stumbled his hand, slipping on the leash before he re-gripped it, the leather burning up his palm. He couldn't let go. If he let go, Titan would kill the first person who got in his way. They reached the security checkpoint, the bottleneck of the terminal. It was chaos. The metal detectors were screaming a constant wail of alarms as people shoved through without removing their belts or shoes. Plastic bins were scattered across the floor like debris from a shipwreck. TSA agents were shouting, trying to maintain a perimeter that had already collapsed. "Stop, turn back," an agent screamed, seeing Jack running against the flow. "You can't go this way. The terminal is compromised." Jack didn't stop. He couldn't stop. "We are tracking the suspect," Jack shouted back, not breaking stride. "Get your people out of the way." The agent stepped in front of them, his hands raised. "Sir, I have orders to evacuate." Titan didn't even slow down. He didn't see a federal officer. He saw an obstacle. He launched himself onto the conveyor belt, his paws scrabbling on the rubber rollers. He cleared the X-ray machine in a single-bound landing on the other side, with a heavy thud scattering a tray of laptops and coins. He turned back and barked once, a sharp commanding sound that told Jack to hurry up. Jack vaulted the turnstile, his vest catching on the metal bar, but he ripped free, ignoring the tear in the fabric. He landed beside the dog, breathless. "Good boy," he gasped. "Go. Find him." They were in the sterile area now, the long corridor of luxury shops and departure gates. It was emptier here, but the tension was higher. The people who remained were the ones who realized that running might not be enough. They were huddled in corners watching the news feeds on the overhead monitors, unaware that the real story was sprinting past them on four legs. Titan's head was low, swinging from side to side. The air currents were tricky here, swirling from the ventilation ducts. He lost the scent for a second. He stopped, his claws skidding. He circled rapidly, his nose vacuuming the floor. Jack waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every second they wasted was a second Sarah Jenkins' heart might stop beating. Every second was a tick on the clock of a bomb. Then Titan froze. He snapped his head to the left toward a bank of elevators. He huffed a sound of satisfaction. He had it. He hit the scent again, and it was stronger, fresher. The man had lingered here. He had waited for the elevator. Titan lunged toward the steel doors, but they were closed. The elevator was gone. Jack looked at the digital display. It was stuck on the top floor. The observation deck. The VIP lounges. Of course, Jack thought bitterly. He wants a view. He wants to watch the fire from the skybox. Stairs, Jack ordered, pointing to the emergency exit door beside the elevator bank. Titan hit the door with his shoulder, bursting through it. The stairwell was cool and echoed with the sound of their ascent. It smelled of concrete dust and old paint, but cutting through the stale air was the clove scent. It was heavy here, trapped in the vertical shaft. It tasted like poison. Titan took the stairs 3 at a time, his muscles bunching and releasing with fluid power. Jack burned his lungs trying to keep up. His legs felt like lead, but the fear of failure drove him upward. He thought of the little girl in the cage. He thought of the woman on the table. He thought of the man sitting upstairs drinking whiskey and checking his watch. They burst out onto the 4th floor. The transition was jarring. They left the industrial gray of the stairwell and stepped onto plush burgundy carpet. The lighting here was soft golden and recessed. The air was silent. The chaos of the main terminal was muted down here, reduced to a distant vibration in the floorboards. This was the sanctuary of the elite. The first-class lounge, the Meridian Club. The contrast was sickening. Downstairs, people were trampled. Upstairs, the air smelled of lilies and expensive leather. Titan slowed down. He didn't need to run anymore. The scent was everywhere. It was a cloud. The man was here. He was close. Titan stalked forward, his belly low to the ground. He passed a concierge desk where a young woman in a sharp blazer looked up in shock, dropping her phone. "Sir, you can't be up here," she stammered. "This is a private members' club." Jack ignored her. He held a finger to his lips, scanning the room. The lounge was expansive, divided into intimate seating areas by frosted glass partitions and high-backed velvet chairs. A jazz melody played softly from hidden speakers. A few patrons were scattered around reading newspapers or typing on laptops, oblivious to the fact that the world below them was ending. Titan ignored the woman. He ignored the buffet table laden with smoked salmon and pastries. He ignored the smell of the rich coffee. He moved toward the back of the room, toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the tarmac. The view was panoramic. You could see the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles surrounding the plane on the runway. You could see the ants' nest of the evacuation. And there, sitting in a leather armchair facing the window, he was alone. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Jack made in a year. His hair was silver-styled with precision. A glass of amber liquid sat on the small table beside him. In his hand, he held a phone, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking out the window, watching the panic unfold with the detached interest of a scientist watching bacteria in a petri dish. Titan stopped. He was 20 feet away. The fur on his back stood up in a rigid ridge. A low growl started in his chest, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. It was the sound of judgment. Jack unholstered his weapon, his thumb flicking off the safety. He moved to the side, flanking the dog, trying to get a clear line of sight. He saw the man's profile. It was calm, serene even. He raised the glass to his lips, taking a slow sip. He checked his watch. Titan trembled. The scent of the man was overwhelming now. It smelled of the ribbon. It smelled of the bomb. It smelled of the evil that had cut a woman open and filled her with death. The dog looked at Jack one last time, his eyes pleading for the release. Jack took a breath, steadying his aim. The silence of the lounge stretched tight like a rubber band about to snap. The jazz music played on. The ice tinkled in the man's glass. Titan Jack whispered. The man in the chair stiffened. He hadn't heard the whisper. He had felt the eyes. He turned his head slowly. He saw the cop. He saw the gun. And then he saw the dog. For a split second, the man's composure cracked. His eyes widened. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small black remote. Jack didn't hesitate. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't read him his rights. He gave the only command that mattered. Take him. And Titan became a missile. He launched himself across the plush carpet, his paws tearing into the expensive wool. He covered the 20 feet in a heartbeat, a blur of fur and teeth and righteous fury. The man tried to stand, tried to pull the remote free, but he was too slow. Nature was faster than technology. Instinct was faster than thought. Titan hit him in the chest, hitting him with 80 pounds of muscle and momentum. The chair tipped backward. The whiskey glass shattered, spraying amber liquid and ice into the air. The man screamed, but the sound was cut short as Titan's jaws clamped down on the arm holding the detonator. The silence of the VIP lounge was shattered. The contrast was gone. The war had arrived, and the only thing that mattered now was the strength of the dog's jaw and the speed of the man's thumb. Jack sprinted forward, diving into the fray, knowing that the next few seconds would decide who lived and who died. The atmosphere inside the Meridian Club was a vacuum of manufactured serenity, a stark and jarring counterpoint to the bedlam that was currently tearing the lower levels of the airport apart. Here the air was cool and scented with white lilies and old leather books. The lighting was amber and low-designed to soothe the weary eyes of first-class travelers and obscure the harsh reality of the outside world. There were no screaming children here, no frantic announcements blaring over loudspeakers. Just the soft clinking of silverware against china and the murmur of polite conversation that never rose above a hushed drone. It was a sanctuary for those who could afford to buy their way out of the common inconveniences of life. But as Jack Sullivan stepped onto the plush burgundy carpet, he knew that this sanctuary was about to become a hunting ground. Titan stopped. He didn't just pause in his tracks, he arrested his movement with such sudden and absolute finality that Jack nearly tripped over him. The dog stood frozen, his paws buried deep in the expensive wool pile, his body lowered into a crouch that was ancient and terrifying. He didn't bark. He didn't let out the sharp, high-pitched yelps of excitement that usually signaled a find. Instead, he emitted a sound that Jack felt in the soles of his boots before he heard it with his ears. It was a silent growl, a low-frequency vibration that rumbled deep in the dog's chest cavity, resonating through his ribs and down into the floorboards. In the world of canine, handling the silent growl was the most dangerous signal a dog could give. A bark was a communication, a warning, a shout for attention, or a demand for compliance. A bark said back off or look here, but a silent growl was different. It was the sound a wolf made seconds before it tore the throat out of a deer. It was the sound of a predator that had moved past the need for warnings and had entered the final phase of the kill sequence. It meant that Titan wasn't just alerting to a suspect. He had identified a threat so profound, so visceral, that his instincts had switched from apprehension to elimination. Jack followed the line of Titan's gaze. The dog was staring across the expanse of the lounge, past the mahogany bar, where a bartender was polishing a wine glass, past the clusters of armchairs occupied by businessmen typing on laptops. His eyes were locked on a single figure sitting in a secluded alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the runway. The man was a portrait of elegance. He looked to be in his late 40s, with silvering hair cut in a precise, expensive style that caught the soft light. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him like a second skin, the fabric shimmering with a subtle silk thread. He sat with one leg crossed over the other, his posture relaxed and open, a man without a care in the world. On the small marble table beside him sat a tumbler of amber liquid, probably a single malt scotch, aged long enough to cost more than Jack's monthly rent. This was Victor Draven. Of course, Jack didn't know the name yet. He didn't know the history of the man or the trail of bodies he had left across 3 continents. All he knew was what Titan was telling him, and Titan was saying that this man was death. Draven was holding his glass loosely in his left hand, swirling the ice with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Clink, clink, clink. The sound was tiny, but in the tense silence between Jack and his dog, it sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. His right hand was resting on the handle of a briefcase. It wasn't a standard leather attaché or a rolling carry-on. It was a sleek silver Halliburton hard case made of brushed aluminum and reinforced corners. It looked heavy. It looked industrial. And Draven wasn't just resting his hand on it. His fingers were curled around the handle with a tension that betrayed his relaxed pose. The knuckles were white. He was anchored to that case as if it contained his own heart. Jack moved closer, keeping low, using the high backs of the leather chairs as cover. He needed to be sure. He needed to see the face of the man who would surgically implant a bomb into a mother and lock a child in a cage. As he closed the distance, the smell hit him. Even through the filters of the air conditioning and the aroma of the lilies, it was there. The faint sweet spice of clove cigarettes. It was the same scent that had clung to the pink hair ribbon. The same scent that Titan had tracked through the labyrinth of the terminal. Draven took a sip of his drink, his eyes drifting toward the window. He wasn't looking at the sunset. He was looking down at the tarmac where the emergency lights were flashing in a chaotic red and blue strobing dance. He was watching the SWAT team surround the plane that Sarah Jenkins was supposed to be on. A small, cold smile touched the corners of his lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a smile of satisfaction. He was watching his handiwork. He was waiting for the finale. Titan's vibration increased. The growl was becoming audible now, a wet rolling sound like rocks tumbling in a riverbed. The fur along his spine was standing up in a jagged ridge, making him look twice his size. His muscles were bunched and trembling, coiling tight with kinetic energy. He wanted to go. He wanted to launch, but he held his position, waiting for the word, waiting for Jack. Jack studied the man. He didn't look like a terrorist. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a CEO, a venture capitalist, a man who moved millions of dollars with a phone call. That made him infinitely more dangerous. A thug might panic. A thug might make a mistake out of fear. But a man like Draven was calculated. He was a professional. He had planned this down to the millisecond. The bomb inside Sarah was sophisticated technology, and the man holding the trigger was a sophisticated monster. Draven checked his watch. It was a heavy platinum timepiece that glinted in the light. He frowned slightly, tapping the face of the watch as if impatient. He was waiting for the boom. He was waiting for the pressure wave that would shatter the glass in front of him and let him feel the heat of the explosion on his face. He was likely disappointed that Sarah hadn't boarded the plane yet. He was probably wondering why the schedule was off. Jack looked at the briefcase again. Why was he holding it so tight? If the remote detonator was in his pocket, why did the case matter? unless the case was the control center, unless the case was the link to the girl. A server in a black vest walked past Draven's table offering a refill. Draven waved him away without looking up, his eyes still fixed on the runway. The gesture was dismissive, imperious. He treated the server like furniture, like a non-entity. It was a small detail, but it spoke volumes about his soul. To Victor Draven, people were things. Sarah was a container. The child was leverage. The passengers in the terminal were collateral damage. He felt nothing for them. He was a void in an expensive suit. Titan shifted his weight, his claws scraping silently against the carpet backing. He lowered his head even further, his eyes rolling up to lock onto Draven's throat. The silent growl deepened, shifting pitch. It was a frequency that triggered a primal alarm in the human brain, a sound that dated back to when men huddled in caves and feared the dark. Jack felt a cold sweat trickling down his spine under his tactical vest. He realized with a jolt of clarity that they were out of their depth. This wasn't a standard takedown. If Draven saw them, if he sensed them, he wouldn't surrender. He would burn it all down. He would press the button or open the case or do whatever he had to do to erase the evidence. And erasing the evidence meant killing Sarah and the girl. They had to be perfect. One mistake, 1 second of hesitation, and the airport would turn into a crater. Jack unholstered his service weapon, his thumb resting on the safety. He signaled to Titan with a small hand gesture. Wait. Titan froze completely, becoming a statue of vengeance carved out of muscle and fur. He stopped breathing for a moment, holding the air in his lungs, focusing every ounce of his being on the man in the gray suit. He could hear the man's heartbeat. It was slow, steady, a resting pulse of 60 beats per minute. Even now, on the brink of mass murder, Victor Draven was calm. That calmness terrified Jack more than any screaming rage could have. It was the calmness of a man who believed he was untouchable. A man who believed he was a god playing with ants. Draven set his glass down on the marble coaster. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. Was he reaching for a weapon? Was he reaching for the trigger? Draven's hand emerged holding a silver cigarette case. He opened it, selecting a dark, slender cigarette. He placed it between his lips and produced a gold lighter. The flame flared up, illuminating his face for a split second. In the firelight, his eyes looked dead flat and black like the eyes of a shark. He inhaled deeply, the tip of the cigarette glowing cherry red. He exhaled a long, thin plume of blue smoke. The smell drifted across the room, hitting Titan like a physical slap. Cloves. It was the final confirmation. The last piece of the puzzle locking into place. This was him. This was the source of the rot. Titan's lip curled back, revealing the white ivory of his canines. Saliva dripped from his jowls, landing on the burgundy carpet. He was ready. He was a loaded gun with the hammer pulled back. Jack took a step forward, emerging from the cover of the chairs. He raised his weapon, leveling it at the back of Draven's head. The distance was 20 feet, an easy shot, but he couldn't shoot. Not yet. If Draven's hand was on a dead man's switch, shooting him might trigger the bomb. He needed to secure the hands. He needed Titan to do what Titan was born to do. He needed the dog to become the missile. Draven seemed to sense something. Maybe it was the shift in air pressure. Maybe it was the primitive instinct that tells a prey animal it is being watched. He stiffened in his chair. The cigarette paused halfway to his mouth. He didn't turn around immediately. He sat very still, listening. His hand, the one on the briefcase, tightened even further, the tendons standing out like wire. Jack knew they had lost the element of total surprise. The moment hung suspended in time, a fragile bubble about to burst. The jazz music seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of Titan's silent growl vibrating in the air. Jack whispered the single word that would unleash the storm. Titan. And the statue came to life. The silence in the Meridian Club did not break, it shattered. Jack Sullivan stepped out from behind the high back leather chair, his weapon raised and leveled at the base of Victor Draven's skull. The movement was fluid, practiced 1,000 times on the range, but in the heavy perfumed air of the lounge, it felt like moving through water. "Police!" Jack shouted, his voice cracking like a whip across the room. "Don't move. Hands where I can see them." Victor Draven did not freeze. He did not throw his hands up in surrender. He did not panic. Instead, a look of cold annoyance flickered across his face, as if a fly had landed in his expensive scotch. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting Jack's with a dead shark-like indifference. Then his gaze flicked down, not to the floor, but to his own left wrist. to the platinum chronograph that gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting. Jack saw the movement. It was subtle, microscopic, but to a man who had spent his life reading the body language of violence, it was a scream. Draven wasn't reaching for a gun. He was reaching for the bezel of his watch. The detonator wasn't in his pocket. It wasn't in the briefcase. It was strapped to his pulse. A twist of the dial, a press of the crown, and Sarah Jenkins would be vaporized along with half the terminal below. No, Jack roared, lunging forward, but he was 20 feet away. 20 feet of plush carpet and heavy furniture. He was too slow. A human is always too slow against a machine. But Titan was not human. Titan was instinct wrapped in 80 pounds of kinetic fury. The moment Jack's voice broke the silence, Titan launched. He didn't run, he exploded from his crouch. His back legs dug into the carpet, tearing the fibers as he propelled himself forward. He was a blur of black and tan fur, a heat-seeking missile locked onto a single target. Between Titan and Draven stood a low, heavy coffee table made of tempered glass and polished steel. It was an obstacle that would have forced a man to go around. Titan went over. He cleared the table in a single magnificent leap, his body stretching out mid-air, his jaws opening to reveal the white flash of his canines. He looked like a creature out of a nightmare, a wolf suspended in gravity coming to collect a debt. Draven's hand was moving toward the watch, his thumb hovering over the button. He saw the dog in his peripheral vision. His eyes widened, the arrogance finally shattering into primal fear. He tried to jerk his arm back, but he was fighting gravity and time. Titan hit him. The impact was sickening. The dog slammed into Draven's chest with the force of a battering ram, driving the man backward into the leather armchair. The chair tipped the table, shattered under the force of the collision, sending shards of glass spraying across the room like diamonds. Draven screamed a high, thin sound that was cut off abruptly as Titan's jaws clamped shut. The target was the wrist. Titan didn't bite the throat. He didn't bite the leg. He bit the hand that held the power of death. His teeth sank through the fine wool of the suit jacket, through the starched white cuff of the shirt, and crunched down onto the bone of the forearm. The sound of the radius snapping was audible even over the crashing furniture. Draven's hand sprang open, his fingers going limp as the nerves were severed. The platinum watch was crushed between Titan's molars, the glass face cracking the delicate mechanism inside, grinding to a halt. Draven thrashed wildly, striking at the dog's head with his free hand, but Titan was an anchor. He shook his head violently, tearing at the arm, pulling Draven down into the wreckage of the glass and spilled whiskey. The growl coming from the dog was no longer silent. It was a roar of combat, a savage, chaotic noise that filled the lounge. Jack was sprinting, closing the distance, his gun trained on Draven's center of mass. "Secure him," he yelled, though he knew Titan wasn't letting go. But the chaos wasn't over. From the shadows of the bar area, a movement caught Jack's eye. A man who had been sitting quietly nursing a soda stood up. He was big, broad-shouldered, wearing a cheap suit that didn't hide the bulge under his arm. The bodyguard. Jack tried to pivot to bring his weapon around, but the bodyguard was already moving. He didn't aim at Jack. He aimed at the animal that was tearing his employer apart. The gun came up, a matte black pistol glinting in the dim light. Titan Jack screamed. The gunshot was deafening. In the enclosed acoustic space of the lounge, it sounded like a cannon blast. The muzzle flash was blinding. Titan yelped. It was a short, sharp sound of surprise and pain that pierced Jack's heart. The bullet struck the dog in the shoulder, tearing a furrow through the thick muscle and fur. Blood, bright and arterial, sprayed across Draven's gray suit. Most dogs would have let go. Most animals, when hurt, when shocked by the thunder of a gunshot, would retreat, would self-preserve. But Titan was not most dogs. The pain didn't stop him. It enraged him. He didn't release Draven's arm. Instead, he bit harder. He shook his head with renewed ferocity, growling through the blood, his eyes rolling back in his head. He was wounded, he was bleeding, but he was not failing. He would hold this man until his heart stopped beating. Jack didn't think. He didn't calculate. He reacted. He fired 2 shots in rapid succession. The double tap echoed the first shot, the brass casings clinking onto the floor. The bodyguard jerked violently as the rounds took him in the chest. He collapsed backward, crashing into the bar, taking a row of bottles down with him. The smell of gunpowder mixed instantly with the scent of spilled alcohol and cloves. Jack rushed to Draven, kicking the man's legs apart, pressing the muzzle of his gun into Draven's forehead. "Don't you move!" he snarled, his voice shaking with a rage he could barely control. "Do not breathe!" Draven was sobbing now, clutching his mangled arm. The watch was destroyed, hanging from his wrist by a single bent pin. The detonator was useless. Titan was still on him, his weight pinning the man to the floor. The dog's shoulder was matted with blood, the red stain spreading quickly across his tan coat, but his grip was iron. He looked up at Jack, his eyes wild and dilated, panting blood-flecked saliva onto the carpet. He was waiting. He was waiting for the command to finish it. Jack fell to his knees beside his partner. His hands were shaking as he reached out to touch the dog's neck, avoiding the wound. "Out, Titan," he choked out. "Out." Titan hesitated. He growled one last time, a low vibration against Draven's skin, a promise of what would happen if he moved. Then slowly, reluctantly, he opened his jaws. He released the arm and stepped back, limping slightly, his left front leg trembling. He didn't lay down. He stood over the fallen man, dripping blood onto the expensive rug, watching him with the cold judgment of a wolf. Jack holstered his weapon and ripped the cuffs from his belt, slamming them onto Draven's wrists. He yanked the man's good arm behind his back, not caring if he caused pain. "You are done," Jack whispered into Draven's ear. "You are finished." He looked at the crushed watch, the wires hanging loose from the casing. The signal had been cut. The bomb was dead. Sarah Jenkins was safe. He looked at Titan. The dog was swaying slightly, the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by the shock of the injury. Jack reached out, pulling the dog into his chest, burying his face in the bloody fur. The lounge was silent again, save for the whimpering of the broken billionaire on the floor. But in that silence, Jack heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the steady beating of his partner's heart. The stillness that descended on the Meridian Club was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the ragged breathing of the men and the dog. Jack Sullivan knelt for a moment longer, his hand buried in the thick fur of Titan's neck, checking the wound. The bullet had grazed the muscle, leaving a deep furrow that oozed bright red blood, but the bone was intact. Titan licked Jack's hand, his tongue rough and warm, a reassurance that he was still in the fight. He wasn't ready to stand down. His amber eyes were fixed intently on the silver Halliburton case that sat upright on the table beside the shattered armchair. It was the only thing in the room that hadn't been touched by the violence. It sat there, pristine and gleaming, like a monolith reflecting the chaotic strobe of the emergency lights from the tarmac below. Jack stood up his knees, popping. He wiped the sweat from his eyes with the back of his forearm smearing a streak of soot and blood across his forehead. He looked down at Victor Draven, who was curled in a fetal ball on the expensive rug, clutching his ruined arm and moaning softly. The man was broken, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the pathetic, shivering creature underneath. But even in his pain, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a cold, lingering malice. He wasn't looking at Jack, he was looking at the case. Jack moved toward the table, his boots crunching on shards of broken glass. He felt a magnetic pull toward the aluminum box, a sense of dread that was heavier than the fear of the bomb. Titan limped after him, letting out a low whine as he pressed his nose against the metal latch. He could smell something inside, something that cut through the scent of the gun smoke. He smelled the girl. Jack hesitated, his hand hovering over the latches. He expected to find stacks of cash, the payment for a job well done. He expected to find blueprints, maps, lists of names. He expected the currency of a criminal empire. He took a breath, held it, and flipped the latches. They sprang open with a sharp mechanical snap. He lifted the lid. There was no money. There were no documents. The interior of the case was lined with dark, shock-absorbent foam cut to precision. Nested in the center, wired into a complex battery pack, was a single iPad Pro. The screen was active, glowing with a harsh blue light that illuminated Jack's face in ghostly relief. It was a live video feed. The camera angle was low and grainy, shooting in night vision mode. It showed the interior of a confined space. The walls were ribbed metal, curved and industrial. In the center of the frame sat a wooden crate. It wasn't a shipping container. It looked like an animal transport crate large enough for a large dog, but there was no dog inside. Huddled in the corner of the crate, clutching a dirty stuffed rabbit, was a child. It was Emily, Sarah's daughter. Jack felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. She was alive. She was terrified, her eyes wide and dark in the gloom, her small chest hitching with silent sobs. But she was alive. She was wearing the same clothes Sarah had described, a pink t-shirt and denim overalls, now stained with grime. She looked cold. She was shivering, pulling her knees up to her chest, trying to conserve warmth. "Where is this?" Jack whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "Where are you holding her?" He leaned closer to the screen, searching for clues. The background was dark, but there was noise. A low, constant hum that vibrated through the speakers of the iPad. It sounded like a massive engine idling. Then the image shook. The camera jolted violently, and Emily tumbled to the side, catching herself against the wooden slats. The hum increased in pitch, turning into a high, whining roar that Jack recognized instantly. It was a sound he had heard every day for 20 years. Hydraulics, turbines, jet fuel combustion. He looked at the edges of the video frame. He saw a flash of movement in the background, a piece of luggage sliding past, a black Samsonite suitcase with a red ribbon tied to the handle. Jack's blood ran cold. This wasn't a warehouse. This wasn't a basement in some safe house miles away. He spun around, grabbing Draven by the lapels of his jacket and hauling him up off the floor. The man screamed as his broken arm twisted, but Jack didn't care. He slammed Draven back against the leg of the table, forcing him to look at the screen. "Where is she?" Jack roared. Draven laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound, breathless with pain but filled with a sick triumph. "You are so stupid," he wheezed, spitting blood onto Jack's vest. "You thought you were saving the mother. You thought the bomb was the endgame." Jack shook him again. "Tell me." "She is closer than you think," Draven hissed, his eyes glittering. "Look at the timestamp, detective. Look at the vibration. She isn't in a house. She is cargo." Jack looked back at the screen. The hum was deafening now. The crate was vibrating, rattling against the metal floor. The realization hit him like a physical blow, staggering him. "She is on the plane." Draven grinned, his teeth stained red. "Flight 218 to London. The same flight Sarah was supposed to board. You see, it is all about efficiency. Why charter a private jet to move the merchandise when you can hide it in the belly of a commercial airliner?" The horror of the plan unfolded in Jack's mind with terrifying clarity. It was a masterstroke of evil. Sarah Jenkins wasn't just a mule for the explosives. She was the insurance policy. Draven had put the bomb inside the mother and the daughter inside the cargo hold of the same aircraft. If Sarah had boarded the plane as planned, she would have sat in economy, oblivious to the fact that her child was freezing to death just a few feet beneath her shoes. And if anything had gone wrong, if Sarah had panicked or tried to alert the crew, Draven would have detonated the device. But the explosion wasn't just to kill Sarah. It was to destroy the plane. It was to scatter the wreckage across the Atlantic Ocean. Why, Jack whispered the question, slipping out before he could stop it. Why kill them both? Draven's head lolled back, his eyes losing focus as the shock set in. Because the girl! And she is worth $5 million to the right buyer in Dubai. But if the transfer failed, if the authorities got close, I needed a way to erase the evidence. A plane crash is a tragedy, detective. A kidnapping is a crime. If the plane goes down over the water, nobody looks for a missing girl. They just look for bodies. And fire. Fire cleanses everything. He had rigged the game so he couldn't lose. If the flight landed, he sold the girl and killed the mother remotely to tie up the loose end. If the flight was compromised, he blew the mother to destroy the girl and the evidence of the network. It was binary. It was cold. It was the logic of a machine. But Draven had made one miscalculation. He hadn't counted on a dog. He hadn't counted on a Belgian Malinois smelling the fear and the explosives and refusing to let the woman walk onto that plane. Titan barked. It was a sharp, demanding sound. He was looking at the screen, his head cocked to the side. He heard the whine of the engines through the iPad speakers. He recognized the sound. He knew what it meant. The bird was moving. Jack looked out the window. Down on the tarmac, the massive Boeing 777 was pushing back from the gate. The tug vehicle was disconnecting. The navigation lights were flashing. The pilot had no idea. The tower had no idea. They thought the threat was neutralized in the terminal. They thought the bomb was contained in the tent. They didn't know they were carrying a stolen child in the cargo hold, and they didn't know that the crate she was in wasn't pressurized. Jack looked at the readout on the iPad screen. A small sensor display in the corner showed the temperature inside the crate. It was dropping. 40 degrees, 38. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, the temperature in the cargo hold would drop to sub-zero. The air would thin. Emily wouldn't die from an explosion. She would freeze to death or suffocate alone in the dark, clutching her rabbit while the world watched the news about her mother. Jack dropped Draven. The man slumped to the floor, unconscious or pretending to be. It didn't matter. He was done. Jack grabbed his radio, screaming into the channel, "Tower, stop that plane. Flight 218. Stop it now." The response was a crackle of static and confusion. "Say again, Unit 7. The threat is contained. We are clear for departure." "No," Jack yelled, sprinting for the door. Titan scrambled after him, limping but keeping pace. "The threat is on board. Repeat, we have a live hostage in the cargo hold. Stop the damn plane." Jack burst out of the lounge and into the hallway. He didn't head for the stairs. He didn't head for the elevator. He ran toward the maintenance access door at the end of the corridor, the one that led to the catwalks and the exterior jet bridges. He needed to get to the tarmac. He needed to get to the runway. The plane was taxiing. He could see it through the windows, a massive silver whale turning toward the active runway. The engines were spooling up a rising scream that vibrated the glass. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. He had minutes, maybe seconds. He looked down at Titan. The dog's shoulder was matted with blood, but his eyes were bright, burning with the same frantic energy that Jack felt. They had saved the mother. They had caught the monster. But the mission wasn't over. The payoff wasn't the arrest. It wasn't the bomb defusal. The payoff was the girl. "We have to catch it, buddy," Jack said, his voice grim. "We have to catch the plane." Titan barked once, a sound of pure determination. He didn't care about the pain. He didn't care about the odds. He knew there was a pup in the box, and he was going to get her out. Jack kicked the maintenance door open, and they plunged into the humid night air, the roar of the jet engines swallowing them whole as the race began. The humid night air of the tarmac hit Jack Sullivan like a physical wall, a suffocating blanket of jet fuel fumes and deafening noise that instantly drowned out the ringing in his ears from the gunshot. He burst through the maintenance door onto the metal catwalk, his boots ringing on the grate, but the sound was lost in the screaming whine of the massive high-bypass turbofan engines spooling up just a few hundred yards away. Flight 218 was no longer a stationary object. It was a moving mountain of aluminum and composite, a leviathan waking up and preparing to leap into the sky. The navigation lights on the wingtips flashed in a rhythmic taunt, red and green, winking against the darkness as the Boeing 767 began its slow lumbering turn toward the active runway. Jack didn't stop to think about the impossibility of the task. He didn't calculate the physics of a human trying to catch a machine that generated over 100,000 pounds of thrust. He just ran. He vaulted the railing of the catwalk, dropping 10 feet to the asphalt below landing with a jar that rattled his teeth. Titan landed beside him a second later. The dog didn't land gracefully. His injured shoulder gave way on impact, and he stumbled, his chin scraping the rough concrete before he scrambled back to his feet. A fresh spray of bright red blood splattered onto the tarmac, dark spots visible even in the sodium vapor glow of the floodlights. "Come on!" Jack roared, though he couldn't even hear his own voice. He sprinted toward the nearest vehicle, a baggage tug idling near a stack of luggage carts. The driver, a young man in ear defenders, stared at him in wide-eyed horror as a bloodied cop and a limping wolf-like dog charged at him out of the darkness. Jack didn't ask for permission. He grabbed the man by his reflective vest and hauled him out of the seat, shoving him toward safety before jumping behind the wheel. Titan didn't wait for an invitation. He leaped into the passenger seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his tongue lolling out the side of his mouth. The wound on his shoulder was bleeding freely now, soaking the tactical harness, but his eyes were locked on the plane. He knew the target. He knew the prey. Jack slammed the tug into gear and floored it. The small vehicle wasn't built for speed, but it surged forward, its electric motor whining in protest. Ahead of them, the plane was gaining momentum. It was taxiing faster than usual, as if the pilot sensed the chaos unfolding in the terminal and wanted to get his birds in the air before the airport shut down. The massive wheels of the main landing gear, taller than a man, were churning, leaving black streaks on the pavement. Jack swerved around a fuel truck cutting across the exclusion lines, driving straight into the restricted zone. He grabbed the radio handset from the tug's dashboard, screaming into the general channel. "Tower, this is police. Emergency on the tarmac. Ig. Stop flight 218. Block the runway. Do not let it take off." Static crackled back, followed by the panicked voice of the ground controller. "Vehicle on the taxiway, identify yourself immediately. You are in an active flight path." Jack ignored him. He looked in the rearview mirror. He wasn't alone. Behind him, a phalanx of flashing lights had erupted from the terminal access road. SWAT armored trucks, patrol cruisers, and airport security SUVs were pouring onto the tarmac like a river of blue and red fire. They were forming a wedge charging toward the nose of the plane. It looked like a scene from a blockbuster movie, but the stakes were terrifyingly real. If the pilot didn't see them, or if he panicked and throttled up, the jet wash alone would incinerate them. The lead SWAT truck, a heavy Bearcat armored vehicle, accelerated past Jack's tug. It drove straight at the nose gear of the 777 playing a game of chicken with a 300-ton aircraft. The driver slammed on the brakes, skidding sideways, and parking the massive truck directly across the center line of the taxiway. The pilot of Flight 218 slammed the brakes. The nose of the giant plane dipped violently, the suspension compressing under the sudden shift in momentum. Smoke billowed from the tires as the brakes locked up, screeching with a sound that pierced even the roar of the engines. The plane shuddered and groaned, coming to a halt less than 50 feet from the SWAT truck. The engines whined down, shifting from a scream to a sullen idle. Jack didn't wait for the wheels to stop turning. He drove the tug right up to the belly of the aircraft near the forward cargo door. He jumped out before the vehicle had fully stopped his boots, hitting the pavement running. Titan was right beside him, moving on 3 legs now, the pain in his shoulder clearly agonizing, but his drive overpowering his biology. "Open it!" Jack screamed at the ground crew who were standing by the loader, frozen in confusion. "Open the damn door!" The baggage handlers looked at the guns pointed at them from the arriving police cars and scrambled to obey. The belt loader hummed to life, rising toward the fuselage. Jack lifted Titan. The dog was heavy, 80 pounds of dead weight and muscle. Titan yelped as Jack's hands pressed near the wound, but he didn't snap. He understood. Jack hefted him onto the belt, the rubber surface gripping the dog's paws, carrying him up toward the black maw of the open cargo bay. Jack climbed up behind him, scrambling on his hands and knees. They crossed the threshold into the hold. The interior of the cargo bay was a cavern. It was vast, dimly lit, and freezing cold. The air conditioning systems hadn't fully pressurized the hold yet, and the air smelled of stale cardboard hydraulic fluid and the bitter cold of the upper atmosphere that lingered in the metal ribs of the plane. It was a labyrinth of containers, hundreds of them, pallets wrapped in plastic heavy aluminum shipping containers marked with international jagged barcodes and wooden crates stacked floor to ceiling. It was a needle in a haystack. Jack stood up, his breath misting in the cold air. The silence here was oppressive, insulated from the noise outside by the thick fuselage. He looked at the sea of cargo and his heart sank. There were too many. It would take a team of 10 men an hour to search this physically. They would have to check manifests, break seals, climb over pallets. They didn't have an hour. The child could be suffocating right now, or freezing. He looked down at Titan. The dog was standing on the metal floor, shivering. A steady drip of blood was falling from his shoulder, hitting the deck with a soft, wet tap, tap, tap. He looked small against the scale of the aircraft. He looked broken. Titan Jack whispered, kneeling beside him, "I know it hurts. I know you're tired, but she is here." He pulled the pink ribbon from his pocket, the one Sarah had given him. He held it to Titan's nose one last time. The scent was faint now, masked by the overwhelming industrial smells of the cargo hold, but it was there. "Find her, buddy. Find the girl." Titan inhaled. His body shuddered. He closed his eyes, blocking out the pain, blocking out the cold. He opened his nose to the darkness. He searched for the strawberry shampoo. He searched for the fear. Then he moved. It wasn't the fast, confident trot of the terminal. It was a slow, limping struggle. He dragged his left leg, favoring the wound, his head low to the ground. He moved down the main aisle of the cargo bay, sniffing the air currents that swirled around the containers. Jack followed close behind, his hand hovering over the dog's back, ready to catch him if he fell. Titan stopped at a pallet of electronics wrapped in blue plastic. He sniffed the corner deep exhales that fogged the plastic. Then he shook his head and moved on. Not here. He moved to a set of aluminum luggage containers, the kind used for passenger bags. He sniffed the seams where the air leaked out. He lingered for a second, catching the scent of the suitcase with the red ribbon, but then he moved on. That was the decoy. That was the luggage. He was looking for the life. The trail of blood behind them was getting longer. Jack watched it with a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The dog was bleeding out. He was pushing himself past the point of exhaustion, past the point of safety. Every step was costing him vital fluid. Titan stumbled, his front legs buckling. He hit the floor hard, wheezing. Jack was there instantly, hands on the dog. "That's it. That's enough. We'll search by hand. You're done," Titan growled. It was a weak sound, but it was defiant. He pushed himself back up, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the slick metal. He shook Jack's hand off. He wasn't done. He wouldn't be done until the pack was safe. He turned his head, looking toward the back of the hold where the shadows were deepest. He huffed a sharp intake of breath. His ears perked up. He had caught something. He started to move faster, his limp becoming more pronounced, a loping three-legged gait that was painful to watch. He squeezed between two towering stacks of wooden crates, his body scraping against the rough wood. Jack followed, squeezing through the gap, his vest catching on splinters. They reached a secluded alcove near the tail section of the hold. It was dark here, the lighting strips flickering overhead. Tucked away behind a wall of commercial freight was a single wooden crate. It was labeled "Live Animal" in bold red letters. The manifest sticker on the side claimed it contained a Great Dane bound for a breeder in London. Titan didn't sniff it. He collapsed against it. He slid down the side of the wood, leaving a smear of red blood on the slats. He pressed his nose against the ventilation gap near the bottom and let out a soft, high-pitched whine. He didn't bark. He didn't have the strength left to bark. He just lay there, his body heaving, his eyes closing. Jack fell to his knees beside the crate. He put his ear to the wood. At first he heard nothing, just the rushing of his own blood and the hum of the aircraft systems. Then faintly he heard it. A whimper. Not a dog. A child. "Emily," Jack called out, his voice choking. "Emily, can you hear me?" A small voice trembling with cold and terror answered from inside the box. "Mommy!" Jack let out a sob of relief that felt like it tore his chest open. He grabbed the latch of the crate. It was padlocked. A heavy steel lock designed to keep a large animal secure. He didn't have the key. He didn't care. He stood up, stepping back, and drew his service weapon. He aimed at the wood around the hasp, not the lock itself, careful of the angle. He fired 2 shots. The wood splintered the metal hasp hanging loose. He holstered the gun and ripped the door open. The crate was lined with straw. In the corner, curled into a ball so tight she looked like a discarded doll, was Emily. She was hugging a dirty stuffed rabbit, her face streaked with tears and grime, her lips blue from the cold. She looked up at him, blinded by the sudden light, blinking in confusion. Jack reached in. He scooped her up, pulling her out of the wooden prison and wrapping his arms around her. She was freezing cold, shivering violently. She felt impossibly small. "I've got you," Jack whispered, rocking her back and forth. "I've got you. You're safe." Emily buried her face in his neck, sobbing. "I want my mommy." "You're going to see her," Jack promised. "You're going to see her very soon." He looked down at the floor. Titan was lying in the straw that had spilled from the crate. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and rapid. The pool of blood under his shoulder was spreading dark and glossy in the dim light. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. Jack's heart stopped. Titan. He shifted Emily to his hip, holding her with one arm, and reached out to touch the dog's head with the other. Titan didn't move. He didn't open his eyes. His tail didn't wag. "No," Jack whispered, the panic rising in his throat. "No, no, no. You don't get to do this. You don't get to quit." He grabbed his radio, fumbling with the button. Panic in his voice, now raw and unfiltered. "This is Sullivan. I have the child. Repeat, I have the child. But I need a medic. Not for her. For my partner. Officer down. K9 down. Get a vet to the cargo bay now. Move." He dropped the radio. He reached out and stroked the velvet fur of the dog's muzzle. Titan's tongue lolled out, pale and dry. Jack leaned his forehead against the dog's neck, feeling the faint flutter of a pulse that was fading fast. "Stay with me," Jack begged, tears dripping off his nose onto the dog's face. "You did it, buddy. You found her. Just stay with me a little longer." The cargo bay door was still open, a rectangle of night sky in the distance. Sirens were wailing outside, getting closer. But inside the hold, the silence was returning, wrapping around the man, the child, and the dying hero who had given everything he had for a stranger's scent. Jack held them both, the life he had saved and the life he was losing, and prayed harder than he had ever prayed in his life. The trail of blood on the cargo deck was a jagged red line mapping the final ounces of strength leaving Titan's body. He was no longer running. He was dragging himself. The bullet wound in his shoulder had turned his gait into a lurching rhythmic stumble, but his nose never lifted from the scent cone. The air in the hold was freezing, a biting artificial cold that stung the lungs and preserved the smell of hydraulic fluid and dust, but cutting through it all was the faint sweet trace of strawberry shampoo. It was the scent of the girl. It was the scent of the mission. Jack followed close behind his hand, hovering over his holster, his own breath misting in the frigid air. He wanted to scoop the dog up. He wanted to carry him, but he knew he couldn't. Titan was the compass. If Jack interfered now, they would both be lost in this labyrinth of aluminum and steel. They reached the deepest section of the bay where the shadows swallowed the dim overhead safety lights. Titan slowed. His head swung low, swaying side to side as he triangulated the source. He bypassed a stack of luggage containers. He ignored a pallet of wrapped commercial goods. He moved toward a wall of freight that had been strapped down with heavy cargo netting. Buried in the center of the stack, wedged between heavy machinery parts, was a single wooden crate. It was unremarkable. It looked like every other piece of freight on the plane. The manifest sticker plastered on the side was bright yellow and read in bold black letters, "Computer Parts. Handle with care." Titan didn't sniff the label. He pressed his nose to the seam of the wood where the slats joined together. He inhaled once a long, shuddering breath that rattled in his chest. Then he stopped. The energy that had driven him across the tarmac through the pain and the blood simply evaporated. His legs gave out. He didn't collapse in a heap. He simply lowered himself down, sliding against the side of the crate until he was lying on the cold metal floor. He looked up at Jack, his eyes glassy and dimming. He let out a single bark. It wasn't the thunderous roar that had cleared the terminal. It was a weak, wet sound, a whisper. It was the sound of a soldier saying, "I am done." Jack dropped to his knees beside the dog. He put a hand on Titan's head, feeling the heat of the fever already setting in. "Good boy," he choked out, his voice cracking. "You did it. You found it." He turned his attention to the crate. Computer parts. It was the perfect camouflage. Nobody checks a box of hard drives for a heartbeat. Nobody scans a crate of servers for a soul. It was cold, calculated. Jack grabbed the edge of the lid. It was nailed shut, reinforced with metal banding. He didn't have a crowbar. He didn't have a hammer. He had desperation. He drew his service weapon, gripping it by the barrel, and used the heavy steel butt of the gun as a hammer. He smashed it against the wood near the nails. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a violent, rhythmic pounding that echoed off the fuselage. The wood splintered. He struck it again and again, his shouts of effort mixing with the clang of metal on wood. Splinters dug into his gloves. The crate groaned, the nails screeching as they were forced from their hold. He dropped the gun and jammed his fingers into the gap he had created. He pulled. His muscles burned his veins, popping in his neck. With a crack that sounded like a gunshot, the lid gave way. He ripped it back, tearing the wood free and throwing it aside. He shone his flashlight into the box. For a second, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. He expected wires. He expected machinery. He expected a bomb. He did not expect the flash of pink cotton. Curled in the corner of the crate, nestled on a bed of packing peanuts and anti-static foam, was Emily. She was tiny, impossibly small. She was wearing the denim overalls and pink shirt that Sarah had described, but they were filthy, stained with grease and urine. Her knees were pulled up to her chest in a tight fetal ball. Her hands were clutched around a dirty brown teddy bear, squeezing it so hard her knuckles were white. But it was her face that stopped Jack's heart. Her eyes were closed. Her skin was a terrifying shade of pale blue, the color of old ice. A strip of silver duct tape was wrapped cruelly around her mouth, sealing her lips. She wasn't moving. She wasn't shivering. The cold of the cargo hold had seeped into her bones, slowing her metabolism, slowing her blood. Emily. Jack whispered the name, catching in his throat. She didn't react. She didn't flinch at the light. The lack of oxygen in the sealed crate, combined with the freezing temperature, had pushed her to the very edge of existence. She was fading. She was a candle flame flickering in a draft. Jack reached in his hands, trembling as he touched her cheek. It was ice cold. He ripped the glove off his hand and pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint, thread-like, a tiny flutter against his skin that felt more like a memory of a heartbeat than the real thing. "She is alive," he gasped. He reached for the tape on her mouth. He peeled it back slowly, careful of her skin, wincing as he saw the raw redness underneath. As soon as the tape was gone, her mouth fell open slightly and she took a gasp. It was a shallow, ragged sound, a starving lung fighting for air. Jack scooped her up. He pulled her out of the box, lifting her from the packing foam that had been meant to be her coffin. He pulled her into his chest, wrapping his tactical vest around her, trying to share his body heat. She was limp, a dead weight in his arms. "Stay with me, Emily," Jack pleaded, rubbing her back vigorously, trying to stimulate circulation. "You are safe. Mommy is waiting. You have to wake up." He looked down at the floor. Titan was watching them. The dog hadn't moved. He was lying in a pool of his own blood, his breathing shallow, his eyes half closed. But he was watching. He saw Jack pull the child from the box. He saw the girl. He heard the gasp of air. Titan's tail thumped against the metal floor. Once, twice. A slow rhythmic beat. He knew. He had completed the mission. The pack was safe. The puppy was found. Jack looked from the blue-lipped child in his arms to the dying dog on the floor. The cost of this rescue was measured in blood and bravery. He keyed his radio one last time, his voice breaking. "Code 4, I have the child. She is alive but critical. Hypoxic and hypothermic. I need a medic in the bay now. And get a vet. Do not make me ask again. Save my dog." He sat there on the cold floor of the airplane, holding the little girl, rocking her back and forth while Titan watched over them, his amber eyes slowly closing, his duty finally done. The silence of the cargo hold returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of two hearts beating against the odds and the shallow, ragged breathing of a hero who had given everything he had. The recovery room at St. Jude's Medical Center was quiet, bathed in the soft blue glow of monitors and the hush of early morning. Sarah Jenkins lay in a hospital bed, her body swathed in bandages, her face pale but peaceful. The surgery to remove the device had been a success, a terrifyingly precise operation performed under the highest security, but she was alive. She was whole. But her eyes were fixed on the door, waiting for the only thing that mattered. When the door finally opened and a nurse wheeled in a small gurney, Sarah let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. Sitting on the bed, wrapped in a warm blanket, was Emily. She was clean now, the grime of the cargo hold washed away, her hair brushed and tied back with a new pink ribbon. She looked small and fragile, but when she saw her mother, her face lit up with a brilliance that banished the shadows of the last 3 days. Mommy Emily cried, reaching out her small arms. Sarah pulled her daughter into an embrace that was fierce and desperate, burying her face in the child's neck, inhaling the scent of her skin. She rocked back and forth, tears streaming down her face, whispering over and over again, "I've got you. I've got you. You're safe." It was a reunion that felt like a resurrection, a mother and child pulled back from the brink of annihilation. Down the hall in a specialized veterinary recovery suite, another reunion was taking place. Titan lay on a padded medical bed, his shoulder shaved and stitched, a drain tube running from the wound. He was groggy from the anesthesia, but his eyes were open, watching Jack Sullivan with a steady, calm gaze. Jack sat in a chair beside him, his hand resting on the dog's head, his fingers tracing the familiar contours of his skull. Jack looked tired. He looked aged. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep bone weariness, but as he looked at his partner, he felt a swell of gratitude so profound it made his chest ache. He thought about the chaos in the terminal, the screams, the accusations. He thought about the way the world had looked at Titan, seeing only a monster, a threat, a weapon out of control. "You showed them, didn't you, buddy?" Jack murmured, scratching Titan behind the ears. "You showed them all." Titan let out a soft huff, closing his eyes and leaning into the touch. He didn't care about the news reports that were currently calling him a national hero. He didn't care about the medals or the praise. He cared that the pack was safe. He cared that the bad man was gone. He cared that the little girl smelled like happiness again. Jack stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city skyline. The sun was rising, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. It was a beautiful morning. A morning that almost didn't happen. He thought about instinct. He thought about the invisible threads that connect us, the silent signals that only some are tuned to hear. The world sees a dog, Jack thought, his internal monologue merging with the voiceover of the story. They see teeth and fur and obedience. They see a tool to be used or a pet to be kept. But yesterday, in that airport, Titan was none of those things. When thousands of people walked past a woman in pain, blinded by their own schedules and distractions, he stopped. When technology failed and security missed the mark, he saw the truth. He didn't attack because he was vicious. He attacked because he was desperate. He saw a mother who was a bomb and a child who was a ghost, and he refused to let them die. He broke every rule, disobeyed every command, and risked his life to save strangers who would have let him be put down without a second thought. "We call them animals," Jack whispered, turning back to look at the sleeping dog. "But sometimes I think they are the only ones who are truly human." He walked back to the bed and sat down, taking Titan's paw in his hand. The dog's tail gave a single slow thump against the mattress, a heartbeat of loyalty in a chaotic world. Jack smiled, closing his eyes. "Rest now, partner. You earned it." The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a steady heartbeat and the final enduring image of a man and his dog bound together by a courage that needed no words. Titan's story teaches us a profound lesson about trust and the limitations of human perception. In a world obsessed with technology and protocols, we often forget that nature has gifted us the ultimate protectors. While sophisticated security scanners and human judgment fail to see the danger hidden in plain sight, Titan's instinct pierced through the deception immediately. He didn't see a pregnant woman. He sensed a life in peril and a threat to his pack. This narrative reminds us that true heroism isn't about following orders, it's about doing what is right even when the whole world screams that you are wrong. It highlights the unbreakable bond between a handler and their dog, a connection built not just on commands, but on a shared soul. Titan proves that sometimes the only thing standing between us and disaster is the unconditional loyalty of a dog who asks for nothing in return but a pat on the head. If Titan's incredible courage touched your heart, please hit the like button and share this video to honor the silent guardians who keep us safe. Subscribe for more powerful stories of loyalty and tell us in the comments, do you believe dogs have a sixth sense?